They're dancing together. And this would cause the police to come in and shut down the concert. They start pulling wires out of the plugs, out of the wall. The concert was over, no more.
Welcome back to If I'm Really Honest, where I seek truth without tribalism. It's a place where ignorance isn't punished, curiosity is rewarded, and conflict doesn't mean contempt. And if there's one guy on the planet who embodies all of that, it's a guy named Darryl Davis, a real-life urban legend, a black pianist who owns a closet full of KKK robes from the members he has courageously befriended and de-radicalized. Now, he would say that they de-radicalized themselves, and he just planted the seed. And that's part of the reason I love him so much. The persistent humility to make other people feel empowered and enlightened. Now, Darryl has been telling his story for decades, around the world, on news and TV and major podcasts like Joe Rogan and Timcast, and he's got his own award-winning documentary called Accidental Courtesy, and he's written multiple books like this one entitled The Klan Whisperer, full of crazy anecdotes and full-color pictures you can't find on the internet. Trust me. Fun fact, he was also on an episode of HBO's The Wire. But given the fact that we're both jazz pianists and he was a close personal friend to tons of rock and roll legends like Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis and Billy Joel, our conversation about race relations was conducted largely through the musical lens at the beginning and end. So it was less like the stories you may have heard in his other interviews. So definitely go check out his other work so you can hear Darryl's greatest hits, and then subscribe here so you can hear part 2 when it drops. But now I give you a unique look through the eyes of a kindred spirit and a man I will forever boast about by calling him my friend, Darryl Davis. Can you tell me about your conversations with Jerry Lee Lewis and talk about maybe what I don't even know really, was there any animosity between people like Otis Blackwell and Chuck Berry and then people like Elvis Presley who arguably stole their sound and stuff like that?
None at all. And I would not consider it stealing. Okay, let's okay. So let's talk about that. Okay, first of all, rock and roll, as we know it, was created by black artists, namely Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Fats Domino, Bo Diddley. It was popularized by Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, Buddy Holly, Bill Haley and the Comets, and various other great artists. Okay, when it first came out, in fact, the term cover song, you see a band, you don't know them, and you say, you guys play originals, you play covers, all right? The first definition of the term cover song was when a white artist covered a black artist. That was the first definition. And the first rock and roll cover song was a song called Shaboom, and it was originally by a doo-wop group called the Chords. And then a white group came along and did it called the Crew Cuts. Hello, hello again. Shaboom, and hoping we'll meet again. What was happening was, well, first of all, there was segregation, all right? And white stations would not play black records on the radio. There was only a handful that would. And so...
Can I clarify there?
Sure.
As I understand it, they wouldn't play if you didn't know the color of the person and they sounded white. It was a matter of whether or not the audience was open to the sound, not the actual skin color of the artist. Is that right or no?
No, but I'm getting to that exactly. So no, the stations would not do it, even if they knew, even if the artist did sound white. Okay, which is why record companies would not put the black artist's picture on the 45 sleeve. Okay, so somebody who had a smooth, silky voice, like a Nat King Cole, unforgettable, like the Platters, like Johnny Mathis, people like that, they got airplay on the white stations because the white DJs and program managers did not know they were black. Somebody like Little Richard or Muddy Waters or B.B. King, who have a certain accent that tells you that person's black, did not get any airplay. And in order to sell records back then, you had to have airplay. People had to hear this record, get up off their butt, go to the record store, buy it, and bring it home, right? Today, you just go on iTunes or whatever and just download it, right? So, we didn't have that back then. So the black radio stations of which there were very few, they did not have the wattage to broadcast far and wide. It was just basically local, right around the neighborhood, more or less, whereby the white stations had 50,000, 100,000 watts broadcast all over the state before the FCC came in and regulated the amount of power you could put out. But some stations could broadcast over several states.
All right, who said my telecommunications degree would never pay off? So for a little bit of context, in the early 1900s, radio technology was spreading, and pretty much anyone could broadcast anything they wanted to. It was kind of like the situation we have right now with kids and their electric scooters. Sorry, I'm an old man, and where I live, it's 2025, and it's a major problem right now. But if you also went through a midlife crisis around 2015, then you also owned a drone, and so you experienced a similar thing. Like everyone's got a new thing that didn't exist before, and so now we need some regulation. And the people with the new thing always cry tyranny, while everyone else cries thank God. Now, in the same way that when you have an x-ray taken, it doesn't mess with the light that's in the room, even though they're both electromagnetic waves. Radio signals that get sent out also don't mess with each other as long as they're set to different frequencies, which is why if you're also old like me and you listened to the radio at one point in your life, you had to tune it in to a certain number. That number was the frequency. All the radio waves of all the stations are passing through your body and your car at the same time, but you can tell your radio to just listen to that one narrow band of waves, not the musical band. So as of the Radio Act of 1912, you're now required to get permission from the government to broadcast on a certain frequency, also known as a band because it kind of bleeds over into the other frequencies. It's kind of like how when you look at a rainbow, you can see the yellow part, but also it's like a range of yellowishness that kind of bleeds into other stuff. So the government probably won't give you a license for like 105.1 if there's another radio station on 105.2. But in addition to needing a license for a particular band, you also need a license for how much power you can put behind your station. These are waves, and the bigger the wave, the farther it's going to go. So if you just put like 100 watts behind your station, it's just going to be like in your neighborhood, like maybe a mile or two. If you want to reach your whole city of like 20 miles or so, you're going to need somewhere between 1 and 5,000 watts. 100,000 watts is the maximum allowed in the United States, and you can get up to like maybe 100 miles depending on the terrain. It's actually half that for AM radio, but AM radio is different for a lot of reasons. The most interesting being that the sun affects the AM waves, which is why they have to use less power at the night, because if you use the same amount of power when the sun goes down, you can go like 5 times as far with the same amount of power. And then you're bleeding into all the other radio stations of all the other cities. And that's how and why you get in trouble with the government. This is why in North Korea, I believe they're not allowed to own radios near the South Korean border. The South Koreans have radio stations that broadcast into North Korea, letting them know that they're in a dictatorship and how free the rest of the world is. And there's nothing really that North Korea can do about that, except ban radios. This doesn't really have much to do with Darryl Davis anymore, but I gave Sac State 30 grand for that, so you're welcome. Like and subscribe, and we'll call it even.
And so the farther it broadcasts, the more people heard it. The wider the population, the bigger the seller the record would be. All right. So the idea was to get airplay on the white stations. And in order to do that, if you sounded, that you couldn't tell if this person black or white, they would keep the picture off the 45 sleeve. Okay. Now, Elvis Presley, he sounded black. Now, if you hear Elvis today, we've heard him so much. As soon as you hear his voice, you have a picture of him in your exactly. But if you had never seen him before and you heard him for the first time, he sounded black. Absolutely. And even in some songs, I saw him like 14 times, and sometimes I'm watching him sing. I'm like, man, he sounds black,
Right.
But because he listened to that, he listened to it very carefully, and he grew up around it. He lived in the projects in Tupelo as a child. His father got in trouble with the law for forging checks, passing bad checks, so he got put in jail. And of course, when he came out, he's a felon, he's a criminal, and nobody's hiring felons. So in order to support his family, he had to have a job. So he moved to Memphis, Tennessee, right over the Mississippi border, and got a job there. Because back then, they didn't have electronic databases where you could, see somebody was arrested over there somewhere, right?
Right.
So it's
hop on a train and you're good to go.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah, and he first lived in the projects in Memphis, and he would hang out on Beale Street. He'd go to black churches, hear all these black musicians, and he always acknowledged that. He always acknowledged that. Um, when he first came out, Sam Phillips of Sun Records had said before Elvis ever walked in there, Sam Phillips was a white guy. I knew Sam, and he uh, loved black music. Ike Turner, who was down there in Memphis, Rufus Thomas, Elmore James, Pine Top Perkins, all these people. He would record them. B.B. King was from there, and he couldn't make any money because all these records he'd taken to the stations, they wouldn't play them. So he had made the comment that if he could find a white guy with the Negro sound, he could make $1 million, right? Lo and behold, one day Elvis walks in to record a song for his mom, and Sam wasn't there, but his receptionist, Marion Keisker, was there and heard him and said, "Wow, this is the guy that Sam is looking for." And lo and behold, she got his information, gave it to Sam, and months later, all the stories go, Sam called him immediately, but no, that didn't happen. It was like months later, Sam called him and he came in, and long story short, they cut "That's All Right, Mama," which was an old black blues song by Arthur Big Boy Crudup. That's all right, now, mama. And that was the sound Sam was looking for, and put it out. And he took it to Dewey Phillips, no relation to Sam, who was a DJ there in Memphis. And Dewey played it, and the phone lines went crazy. He had to play it 17 times in a row because the kids just kept calling in, play that again, right? And the parents were calling in saying, "Get that N word off the radio," so, so, Dewey knew that Elvis was white because Sam and him were good friends and told him. And so Dewey called the Presley house, and Elvis was at the movies with his girlfriend or something. They had to send somebody to the theater and get Elvis to come into the radio station and be interviewed by Dewey. And you can find that interview on YouTube. And Dewey says, "Oh, Elvis, how old are you?" "I'm 19, sir." And Elvis, "Well, what high school do you go to?" "I go to Humes High, sir." Well, that right there told the parents he was white, because back then schools were segregated. If you went to Humes High School, that was a white high school. There's no way a black guy's going to Humes High
That's your
School.
white card. Yeah.
Exactly. So that calmed the parents down a little bit, okay? Because now, okay, well, at least he's white. So, okay, fine. But why is he singing that black music, And then, they hadn't seen him yet.
So how did they? I was going to ask, how did they know that that he was singing black music if they're not listening to black music? In my mind, like if you haven't been in a part of the black community or at black church, you haven't heard
Right.
that sound, really. But
Well, you may have heard it here and there, or you're familiar with it, but you don't go out and listen to it. But it's around. Might hear
it's
somebody
hard to
singing
imagine that context for me. So yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay, it's like people singing on the street corner, and BB King got his start singing on the sidewalks of Memphis, busking, playing the guitar on the sidewalk, people walking by and throwing money in his guitar case. Okay, so they're familiar with it, and plus you had Beale Street right there in Memphis, which was like the black mecca of music in Memphis. So they were familiar with it. They didn't go there, but you could hear it all night and day coming up, and Elvis would go there. Okay, so
So if I can draw an analogy, let me know
sure.
if this sounds right. It would be similar to like if you had like a classical musician, but they like had a rap in the middle of it, and we'd be like, "Oh, that's not our music. I don't want to hear that in my music." Is that similar at
Similar,
all?
very
Okay.
similar, very similar. Yeah. So they calmed down a little bit because at least he was white. All right. But they went off again when they saw him, because when he appeared on TV and he was doing all that wiggling and knocking his knees and shaking his hips, okay, which is what black people did. And they even did it in the church. That's where he got it from. They went off. The kids went crazy. The parents went off. All right. And he was um, accused of corrupting white youth. All right. But the demand, so he got kicked off TV. They barred him from TV. But the
Elvis
demand,
Presley.
Yeah,
Okay.
but the demand was so high that they brought him back, but they only filmed him above the waist. Yeah,
Okay. Cool. I had no idea that was a race thing.
yeah.
I thought that was just like white Puritanism gone
No,
crazy,
no,
but
no.
it was okay.
Because it was too sexual for them, and black people were a little more liberal about that kind of thing than they were. Thus the liberal conservative kind of thing, right? So they filmed him above the waist only, right? And the kids were going crazy. They started gravitating towards that music. It was something different for them, right? So they hated the establishment, hated Elvis Presley, all right, until they saw how much money he could generate.
Always, right?
Always, right. And then they embraced him and appointed him the king. He Elvis invented rock and roll. He's the king. He always denied that. He gave that credit to Chuck Berry and to Fats Domino. Um, of course, things changed over time, and they embraced him. But when rock and roll, okay, let's theaters, concert halls, back in the 1950s, 1940s, they were segregated. If they allowed black people to come in at all, because a lot of them no black people at all, right? But when they allowed them to come in, they had segregated seating. There were ropes going around the seats with signs hanging down that would say seating for white patrons only, colored seating only. Like you've seen the pictures of the water fountains or the restrooms, colored water fountain, whites only, whatever. Okay, same thing in concert halls. So if some white person and I were to go see Frank Sinatra back in the 1940s, we could not sit together. I had to sit in my section. He had to sit in his section as designated by the color of our skin. How crazy is that? But that was the USA. All right. So that was the law. That was the law. If you broke the law, you get arrested. All right. So most people obeyed the law. They sat wherever they're supposed to sit and watched the concert, and all was good until the 1950s. Those same laws, they're called Jim Crow laws or laws of segregation, right? They were still in place. However, two phenomenons happened. One, the invention, as I just pointed out, by black artists of this new genre called rock and roll. And when they would come out playing this new beat, whether it was Chuck or Elvis or Richard or Jerry Lee or whoever, white kids and black kids could not sit still. They could not control it. They just bounced up out of their seats. They knocked over the signs. They're boogieing and dancing in the aisles together. For the first time in the history of this country, white kids and black kids were dancing together. And here's the thing, they didn't even know each other. Why didn't they know each other? Because they didn't go to school together, right? And you had this is the South, right? You had those railroad tracks running through the middle of town. Blacks lived on one side, whites lived on the other side. Thus, the old saying, "He comes from the wrong side of the tracks," right? Meaning the black side of the tracks. Okay, so these kids didn't even know each other, but they're dancing together, and this would cause the police to come in and shut down the concert. They start pulling wires out of the plugs, out of the wall. The concert was over, no more. And city fathers, mayors, councilmen began banning rock and roll concerts from coming to their town because it was corrupting white kids.
Wow.
But when they could not stop white kids gravitating towards that, what they began doing was the record companies began getting their white artists who were singing Tin Pan Alley and pop ballads and stuff to cover those songs. So you had people like Pat Boone singing Tutti Frutti and all these other songs, terrible, terrible
I
versions.
can't even imagine. I'm gonna have to look that up. That
Yeah,
sounds
yeah, yeah. You can see it.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's horrible. Now, he's a great ballad singer. You know,
Sure.
yeah, but
Yes.
he was not Elvis. He was
No.
not
Yes.
Chuck Berry.
No disrespect to him. That's not what he is.
Right,
Yeah.
and it's because they were trying to lure the white kids back. So because what they did not want, was to see little white girls screaming and hollering over a black idol on stage, and throwing their undergarments up on stage like they would do for Frank Sinatra or somebody, you know.
Yeah, well, and I would imagine the opposite way. Like if it's a black girl that's excited about a white performer, well, that just proves how base black people are, or like that's just an insult to them. But if a white girl is excited about a black artist, something's wrong with our setup here. We need to make new laws, or it's not
Exactly.
it's never the white person's fault. I'm fascinated by this. I know our time is limited, and I feel like I needed to switch gears.
Well, we could
Um,
always do a part two.
I would love that. Yes, I have so many questions. It's funny because to hear you talk about this, because that's been my experience. And I, this is a different time than it was then. But my experience has always been when I toured with a black gospel group for a while, and I never experienced I was the only white guy there, but other than that, like self-consciousness, I never
Hmm.
experienced a single bit of racism ever. It was just like, if you can play, you can play, and if you can't, you can't. Like, skin color never came into music in my
Hmm.
world. And so but then you hear about, like, oh, they stole music from them. It's like people are aggrieved on behalf of those people. And obviously, like, what happened culturally between like the Chuck Berrys and the Presleys, like you can look at it and see the problems with that. But as far as the actual individuals, I find them to be very gracious, and the Chuck Berrys are never as aggrieved as the world wants them to be.
Well, here's a thing. Okay, so there's always a lot of accusations of cultural appropriation and songs, etc. So let's define it. Music is to be shared by everybody. And when you create something, that becomes your intellectual property. And if you don't want it stolen, you protect it. And how do you protect it? By a copyright. So you get it copyrighted by the Library of Congress. All right. And so if somebody comes along, and whether they do it intentionally or they just happen to have the same idea that you had by coincidence, it happens, right? Um, Whoever has the first date on the copyright is theirs. All right. Okay. So now, um, Elvis always gave credit to who his influences were. There were some people who took other people's songs and did not, and I'll name them. For example, Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin flat out stole a lot of songs from Willie Dixon, a great blues writer. Listen to "Whole Lot of Love" by Led Zeppelin, and then listen to "I Need Love" by Muddy Waters. Same song. Led Zeppelin took credit for writing it. All right. Um, Howling Wolf did a song called "Killing Floor," written by Willie Dixon. Led Zeppelin did the same song and called it the Lemon Song. Okay. Now, the Beach Boys took a Chuck Berry song called "Sweet Little 16," and they kept the same melody, the same chord progression, same everything, except changed the words and took credit for writing it. You can't do that without permission. All right. And Chuck, now they did not do it maliciously. They did it as kind of a tribute to Chuck Berry. He inspired them. They loved his music, and they recorded a bunch of his songs. But even so, you cannot take somebody else's material and misuse it or use it for any purpose without their permission. So they got sued, and Chuck Berry won. And so now when you see Surfing USA, which was like their biggest hit, it says Chuck Berry.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's cool. Well, I would imagine that you have to be a Chuck Berry in order to actually be able to make that happen. Like, you can't sue the Beach Boys if you're just
the
some dude
publishing
who
the
wrote
publishing
songs with them.
company sues.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
So
now with Elvis Presley, um, his biggest songwriters were the team of Lieber and Stoller, Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller. A lot of people call them the Lennon and McCartney of the 50s. I say no. Lennon and McCartney were the Lieber and Stoller of the 60s. Okay.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Two white guys. They wrote a lot of great songs for Elvis, for the Coasters, the Drifters, a lot of, groups back then, right? Now, when a songwriter writes a song, the songwriter gets 100% of the songwriting royalties. The publisher gets 100% of the publishing royalties. So it's like 50-50, okay? Otis Blackwell, one of the greatest rock and roll songwriters out there, black guy, all right? He wrote songs for Elvis, for Jerry Lee Lewis, for Peggy Lee, all kinds of different people. Colonel Parker, who was Elvis's manager, very shrewd and evil person, he told Otis, if you want Elvis to record your songs, you have to give Elvis 50% writing credit. Elvis never wrote one word,
Right.
not one word. Okay. And so if you look at Elvis's biggest hit, his biggest record, biggest selling record was Don't Be Cruel. That was written by Otis Blackwell. All Shook Up, Return to Sender, Such an Easy Question, Paralyzed, all great hits by Elvis, written by Otis Blackwell. Great Balls of Fire for Jerry Lee Lewis was written by Otis Blackwell.
Wow.
Otis,
I didn't
yeah,
know that one.
yep. Otis got 100% of the writing royalties for the ones he did for Jerry Lee. But Colonel Parker made him give up 50% to Elvis because Colonel Parker was getting 50% of Elvis. So neither one of them wrote anything, but they reaped benefits off of Otis's writing. So I was Otis's musical director for 3 years, and I asked him. I said, "Man, what? This again. This wasn't Elvis's doing. This is Colonel Parker's doing." I asked him. I said, why would you give that up, man?" And he said, "Daryl, back in the '50s, it was hard enough for a black man to make any money. You know, um, with racism and this, that, and the other. And, rock and roll was not accepted by the establishment. 50% of Elvis was a lot of money. And Otis was a millionaire. He became a multimillionaire, okay? But he should have had twice as much as he did. So he said, he did it because it was a lot of money, and, 50% is better than zero. I don't know that I would have done that. But Colonel Parker tried to pull the same thing on Dolly Parton. Do you know the song? Oh, well, of course you know the song. One of Whitney Houston's biggest hits. Okay, it was written by Dolly Parton. Well, before Whitney recorded it, Elvis Presley was going to record it. Yeah, and he wanted to do it. Dolly Parton agreed to let him do it, and he invited her to come down to the studio to watch him record it. And the night before, Colonel Parker called her and said, "Now you have to give Elvis 50% of the writing." She said, "No,
Dolly's not having that.
I'm not having that." It was a number one hit for her when she
Right.
did it. And she wrote it. She said, "I'll give that up."
Yes.
So
Right.
Colonel Parker would not let him record it.
Once again, though, I feel like you have to be a Dolly in order to have the guts to make that call. She's in a position to be able to say no. Not everybody's in a position to be able to say no to that. I feel like that's even true today for like a lot of artists. If a record company comes to you with a deal, like there's a part of your soul, I feel like, that you're probably selling if you sign that thing, because most of the contracts are
Biased,
predatory.
right?
I am going to switch though to talk about your new book.
Yeah, it came out 2 days after Christmas. It's called The Klan Whisperer, and you can find it on Amazon.
Let me ask you this: how long does it actually take? Because was it Jeff Scoop that was 3 years between you meeting him and him quitting, or was it longer than that?
No, see, I met him in two. I mean, I knew who he was long before I met him, but I
Okay.
met him in 2016,
Okay.
and yeah, I think it was 2019. Yeah, yeah, about
Right.
3 years. Yeah.
So, like in real life, 2016, you meet him. It is, let's say, a cost to you to befriend him and to continue relationship with him. 2017, you've spent a year with this guy, and he's still pretty much the same guy.
Well, no, I didn't. I didn't actually spend a year with him. I met him in 2016, and then a lot of things transpired in that interim. And it wasn't just me. It was definitely I had a big impact on him, but also a mutual friend of ours, a lady named Dia Khan, who is a beautiful, beautiful Muslim filmmaker. He had met her as well, and she planted some seeds. So these things just kept popping up, and it finally grabbed him because in terms of time, a white supremacist, whether a neo-Nazi or a KKK member or whatever, or even black supremacists, whatever, they're not stamped out of a standard cookie cutter. They come from different walks of life, different reasons for joining, different whatever. And so there's no definite time limit. Okay, so I talk to somebody a week later, they're gone, or a month later. No, it all depends upon the individual, where they are, what their station in life is. For example, if Jeff was just let's say he had joined the Nazi Party, the NSM, National Socialist Movement, okay, and he's not the commander. Um, he's just a regular member of the group. He probably would have quit sooner, okay, because he had nothing invested in it,
Right.
right? But for 25 years, he was a member for 27 years. For 25 of those 27 years, he was the commander. He built that organization into the largest neo-Nazi organization in this country. There are plenty of them around, but his was the largest. All right. And when you have recruited hundreds of people, you're powerful. You are the leader. All right.
And that's
So
your
now
identity. That's
that's your
that's that's
identity.
yeah.
And you did not show weakness. You did not cave in to the enemy. And now, how do you go back and tell your people, hey, I was wrong. You all should not be in this.
That's the hardest thing in
So,
the world. Yeah.
exactly. So, you struggle with that. And that can take up time. How do you, so for a while there, he kind of like went, um, what's the word? Became reclusive. He wasn't associated with anybody while he tried to get his head together, that kind of thing. So you got to admire somebody who's at the top of the game and is willing to trade in all that power for what is right.
Yeah. That takes it seems like a superhuman amount of empathy for that sentence to come from you, because I feel like so much of politics for sure, but just society and our own natural impulses want to not empathize with the other person. And you say sentences like, not every neo-Nazi is comes out of a cookie cutter. Like that idea, like, no, all of these people over here, these are all just bad people, and they don't have, there's no hope for them, and so
That's
they're
the
the bad guys.
mentality. That's the mentality of a supremacist. That's what makes them supreme. We are supreme and they are inferior. you know?
That's so beautiful. It's so hard for, it seems so hard for people, myself included, to see myself in that. But yeah, that's a really beautiful thing. I so much of what you say is so rich in empathy. Do you have a sense of the discrepancy between your empathy and most people's, and do you feel like you've always had that?
Okay, that's an excellent question. And let me try to answer it like this. We hear a lot about tribalization, people being tribalized, right? When the crap hits the fan, they run to their tribe, right? I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but for people who do that, who tribalize, they think everybody tribalizes. I never tribalized. I grew up as a child of parents in the U.S. Foreign Service, U.S. State Department. I lived all over the world. I traveled all over the world. Today, between my childhood travels as a kid of the American Embassy in different countries with my parents, you combine those travels with my now adulthood travels as a professional musician and lecturer. I'm traveling again around the world. When you combine those two sets of travels, I have performed in all 50 states. I have been to 64 countries on 6 continents. So I have seen a wide variety of people. All right. Now, all this travel does not make me a better human being than somebody with less travel. But what it does is it gives me a better and broader perspective on humanity than somebody who has not had that kind of a travel, because all they can do is presume what somebody is like in Africa or in Europe or in South America. I can tell you, I've been there, I've lived there. So, their opinion does not supersede my experience. Okay,
Right.
so,
Right.
so
Yes.
now I have to give you my very favorite quote, and it's by Mark Twain, and it's called the Travel Quote. And Mark Twain said, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime." And that is so true. So my first introduction to school, I did kindergarten, first grade, third grade, fifth grade, seventh grade, all in different schools in different countries. All right. The in-between grades I did back home here in the States. Now, when I was going to school overseas, like I said, my first introduction was overseas kindergarten. My classmates were from all over the world because uh, anybody who had an embassy stationed where we had our American embassy, all of their kids went to the same school. So this little girl here might have been from Yugoslavia, that kid there from Japan, that kid from Nigeria, that kid from Italy. You know, that was my norm. So I grew up tribalizing, if you will, with everybody. Okay, where kids in this country, most of them, they went to all white schools, depending upon how, what era they came up in, or all black schools. Okay, so I didn't know tribalization. Everybody was my tribe, and there was no racism. Okay, I didn't experience that until I came home. In fact, Jeff, well, we just did a thing down in Orlando together, Jeff Scoop. But I guess it must have been maybe late last year. He ran into some people. They had come to one of his lectures, a couple guys from Cameroon, and they told him that they had no idea they were black until they came here.
Right.
And I totally get
Yes.
it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So in high school, one of my best friends was he grew up in Guinea in West Africa.
I lived in Guinea, in Conakry, Guinea. Yeah, I lived there for
Right.
two
Yes.
years.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know how far away from Conakry he was, but I've heard him speak a lot about it. But I mean, he was whiter than me. he was extremely white. But he spoke French fluently. So it was funny though because he would get in situations where people would tell him about Africa. In talking about race relations, like, okay, like. I spent 16 years there. I spoke French. When a lot of
I
people think of
understand.
Africa, they don't think French. That's the main
Yeah.
language. So,
Okay. So
anyways, he would educate them about Africa as a white
let me
person.
tell you exactly what you're saying. Okay. As a kid, 'cause I spoke French fluently as well. I've forgotten a lot of it because if you don't use it, you lose it. But when I hear it, it comes. It's always there, but you just got to trigger it. Um, but anyway, yeah, when I would come back from, I lived in Ethiopia, Ghana, Guinea, Senegal, various places over there. Spent 10 years on the continent of Africa. Lived in Europe. Um, when I would come back as a child and go to school, of course, you go around the room, where you're from, where you're coming from, da 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 da. And when I would name some African country or something, the first thing my third, my fourth or fifth graders would ask me would be, did you see Tarzan? Things like that. Did you live in a mud hut? Were lions and tigers running through your backyard? Well, first of all, there are no tigers in Africa. Okay, you find tigers in India and here in North America. You don't find them in Africa unless they're in a zoo. But lions are there and things like that. But no, they're not running through my backyard. And no, I did not live in a mud hut. And yes, there are tall buildings and things like that. And no, Tarzan does not exist. But that's their perception.
Right. It seems like, I think it feels like, if you haven't done much traveling, it feels like you just need to learn about the other cultures, but there's a certain extent to which learning about those other cultures, you're getting that through the lens of whoever is telling you about that other culture. It's like the difference between sitting in Spanish class in your white high school and actually going to Mexico. Like, they're two very different experiences, and until you put yourself in that situation, you don't have, even if you have a lot of knowledge of what that is like over there, it's still that over there. And until it's
Right.
this here and it's a part of you, then you don't gain that same benefit that you do from travel.
You're absolutely 100% correct. And the sad part of it is this. According to our U.S. Census Bureau, most Americans don't even own a passport. Less than 40% of Americans own a passport, which means we don't travel a whole lot in this country. Now, Europeans, they travel all the time. They're always going somewhere. And so therefore, they are a lot more worldly than we are. Again, that does not make somebody a better human being. It just gives them a better perspective on the world. You know, when we think about travel here, it's if you live in the city, you go to the beach, or you go to Disney World or Disneyland, something like that. But most people don't go very far from where they live.
Yeah, well, and to be fair, America is ginormous compared
Yeah.
to Europe. So there is a lot more diversity within our country. There's a
Yes,
lot of diversity in
there
America
is a
compared to
lot of diversity here, and the problem is we don't take advantage of it.
yes, even without a passport, you could gain a lot more experiences than
Yes.
you do if you're not traveling to the other cultures within your country. If you live in
Right.
America, it's you've got this great opportunity. You don't need a passport. You can actually go visit and meet other people from very, very different lives. Who are the people that you find it hardest to empathize with?
It's hard to empathize with anybody who judges you by the color of your skin or your religion or, you know, whatever. But I put it in my mind that this person has not had the experiences that I've had. Maybe I can share some of my experience vicariously and hope this person will just listen to them and think about it and maybe go explore that or go research it. Um, I consider racism to be a mental illness. I really do, and because it's not normal, well, first of all, racism is taught. It's taught, and it's ridiculous to judge somebody's intelligence or somebody's IQ just on the color of their skin. So and if you're doing that, something is mentally wrong with you. Okay, but the good thing is this: it can be cured. It can be cured. It can be cured through education and through exposure. You know, so yes, it's hard to empathize with people, but I can do it because I look at it through the lens of this person has not had some of the benefits that I've had. So let me see if I can share some of what I've learned and impart that. And there's something that I can learn from them too that maybe I have not experienced. Another thing is this perception. You've heard the expression, one's perception is one's reality. That is so true. Whatever somebody perceives becomes their reality, even if it's not real. It's their reality. You cannot change anybody's reality. You cannot do it. Okay. And that's the mistake so many of us make. We try to change somebody else's reality. Even though we know what they're thinking is wrong, it does not exist or whatever, we know what's real. We've seen it. Okay. They don't know. It's their reality. And when you try to change somebody's reality, they perceive it as an attack on them and they're going to defend. And it's going to escalate until it comes into an explosion. It's not going to, you cannot change somebody's reality. You cannot beat their reality out of them. You beat them, you just reinforce what they already believe, right? So, what you have to do, it's almost counterintuitive. Rather than attack somebody's reality, what you have to do is offer them a different perception or perceptions, plural. If they resonate with one of the perceptions that you've put forth, they will then change their own reality because perception becomes their reality. To give you just a quick example, let's say you have a young brother and maybe 7 or 8 years old. He goes to a magic show with his buddies. He comes home and tells you, Jermaine, you're not going to believe this. This magician on stage, he asked for a female volunteer, and 50 women raised their hand. And he called one up on stage, and he asked her to climb into this long box and stick her feet out the hole at that end and put her head out the hole at this end. And so she did. And then he closed the lid. He took a chainsaw and went right through the middle of the box. Brrrr. Chainsaw came out the bottom of the box. He cut her in half, and then he told her to wiggle her feet, and she wiggled her feet. And you say, listen, no, it didn't happen like that. Yes, it did. I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. You weren't there. You've attacked his reality. He's 100% right. You were not there. You did not see it. He was there and he saw it. So how dare you challenge his reality when you weren't even there, right? He feels under attack, all right? Okay, so he goes on to give you more examples of what this guy did to prove that this happened. He says after the guy cut her in half and she wiggled her feet, he took the half of the box and moved it over here to stage right and with the feet, and the other half with the head, put it over there on stage left. And then he walked over there and he talked to the lady's head and she spoke back to him. And then he brought the two halves back together. He made some abracadabra incantation over the box. And then he opened the lid and she climbed out. He cut her in half, put her back together, no blood. And you say, listen, it's an illusion. No, it's not. He's gonna go off on you, man. And next thing you guys know, y'all gonna be rolling around on the floor, hitting each other, okay? Because he's under attack. All right. So rather than attack his reality, even though you know that there's no way this guy could have done that, and of course you're a lot older. He's only 7 or 8 years old. What you do is you offer him a better perception. You say to him, "Listen, I understand what you're saying, but let me ask you a question. I wasn't there, so let's just say, is it possible, perhaps, that when he asked for a female volunteer and these 50 women raised their hand, he picked out one. Do you think it's possible that maybe the girl he picked out works for him? Maybe she knows the trick and she travels all over the country to every show and sits in that same theater seat wherever they go. That way he looks around and zooms in on her. He brings her up on stage, and when she climbs into the box, there's already a pair of mannequin dummy legs laying on the floor of the box that are wearing the same stockings and same high heels that she has on. She grabs the handles and sticks them out the hole so only the ankles and shoes are showing. And then she takes her own knees and brings them up under her chest. So now her whole body is in that half of the box. So when the saw goes through, it never touches her. And then he says, wiggle your feet. She reaches over, grabs the ends of the poles and just shakes them, and the feet wiggle outside the hole, right? And then when he separates the two halves, obviously the feet can't move anymore. So he has to divert your attention from looking at those feet. So he's going to walk over here because your eyes are going to follow him. He talks to her head. Of course the head's going to talk back. Her whole body is there. So then he brings the two halves back together. She pulls those poles back in, leaves them on the floor of the box, and she climbs out. And then your brother says, you know, that might be the only way that could work. You've offered him a better perception. He has resonated, and now he has changed his own reality. And that's what I do. I give these people, I don't convert people. People, if you see my name in the media, it says, black blues musician, whatever, converts 200 KKK people. No, I didn't even convert one. I am the impetus for over 200 to convert themselves by offering them better perceptions rather than coming in and changing their reality.
I think the first step, the thing that's so beautiful about what you do, it feels like naturally, is that in that example, my younger brother is not attacking me with his perception. And it's so much harder when I'm telling him, oh, he's not right, he feels attacked. I feel like in race relations and just in relationships in general, it's so hard. That when you tell someone that they're wrong, often their response is, no, you're wrong. And then you feel attacked. And when both parties are feeling attacked, then there's no clear path forward because you're both doing the same thing now. He's defending his reality, you're defending your reality, and then obviously, well, he just can't see things the way that they are because he's a bad person, and he's thinking the same thing about me. And it feels like someone needs to step out of that and see it from the other person's perspective and not feel attacked by the other person. And actually, in the documentary, one of my favorite moments in there is this little moment. You're talking to Jeff. and he's just, used the N-word and denied the Holocaust and just done all kinds of stuff in this conversation. And then he's having a hard time coming up with George Washington Carver.
I know black people invented peanut butter, and I like that.
What was his name?
Come on,
come on.
Carver?
Yeah, what first name?
George Washington Carver.
And your response, like, for anybody else in that situation, like this white guy, like he can't even come up with George Washington Carver, like, and he's obviously just a bad person. He's not one of me. He's a villain. I'm a hero. I'm gracing him with my presence. But you so naturally are looking for a point of connection that when he finally says Carver, you reach your hand over and you say,
My man.
And like that right there, like that is so beautiful, and it makes my heart so happy, because you obviously could feel very attacked. You were attacked in that moment, but you decided instead to try to find any point of connection. Sure, I'll take it. George Washington Carver, you're amazing. Like, and to reach out and say, you know what, instead of seeing all this stuff that could be separating us, I'm going to just hone in on this moment of connection, because I don't need to change everything that's wrong about you in this moment. More important is the connection that you and I have. And it just, that little moment right there, you reaching over and giving him credit for something that he didn't even necessarily deserve credit for. That was really beautiful. And I feel like that is deep at the heart of empathy and what people need to be looking for when they're trying to connect with other people. I know we're out of time. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And again, I'm in it, give me a call, whatever, let me know, and we'll do part 2 at some point.
I would love that. Yeah. I mean, I obviously as a musician, I'm very interested in the music stuff.
What's your instrument?
Piano and then saxophone are the two main ones. So
okay, so you still playing gospel, or are you doing other things, or what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of what I practice is 50s and 60s jazz, classic jazz stuff. So but gospel is like, nothing speaks to my heart like gospel music. Even jazz, like I like it. It's intellectually stimulating. It's fun to do. But as far as just like sitting down and listening, Charlie Parker, he was Charlie Parker, but some of his favorite music was country western music, just because of what it does to your soul. And I feel like for me, Black gospel music is just, it speaks to me.
And by the way, country music, people laugh, when you say something like that by Charlie Parker, whatever. Country music was invented by Black people.
One day at a time, sweet Jesus.
Okay, Hank Williams Sr., the father of country music, even Jimmy Rogers, the yodeler, the blue yodeler, was singing blues. Hank Williams Sr., when he was a teenager, he used to go see this Black blues guitar player on the streets of Montgomery, Alabama, which is where he's from, who was busking on, playing his guitar and singing songs for change. Hank would give this guy sandwiches that his mother made in exchange for guitar lessons. Look him up. His name is Rufus Teetot, Teetot Payne, Payne. And even Hank Jr., Hank Williams' son, wrote a song about him called Teetot in honor of this guy who influenced his father.
And we all owe Mr. Rufus Payne so much, and he'd say, Teetot, make it ring.
Hank Williams Sr. learned to play guitar and sing from this Black blues musician. And to me, Hank Williams was a blues singer. He was singing from the heart, from the soul.
When the evening sun is sinking down behind the tree.
He was feeling what he was singing. He was emoting, and that's the core of the blues. So, it's society that divides us. If a white guy does a song, it's country. If a Black guy does the same song, it's blues.
All right. Thank you again so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you all for joining me. Hopefully you can tell that I put considerable effort into this thing and gave it to you for free. So now it's your turn. Click a couple of free buttons to share and spread the word. That way, amazing people like Daryl will feel inspired to come back and give you part 2, 3, 4, and 5. And if you're a super fan, click the link in the description for more free ways to support this thing and keep this love train rolling. Be well, my distant cousins. I'm rooting for you, and you should too.